mean, I'll never forget going to a meeting at the White House when Michelle Obama was doing her Let's Move campaign. And she had a meeting on food marketing to children. She was trying to get them to stop, the companies to stop marketing. And we broke up into smaller groups afterwards. And in my group was a major executive at a major food company. And he said, we would love to stop marketing to kids. We think it's wrong, but our stockholders won't let us.
Mm.
There you are.
I photographed Marion years ago, and I always admired her understanding of how money informs food creation, education, and consumption. She explained why so many poor foods are such a large part of our lives and what can be done to reimagine how we consume on many levels. She also has this indelible font of energy and joy and enthusiasm that permeates her work in an unexpected manner, making it both more digestible and also infinitely appealing. I hope you enjoy. This is The Other Pod. It's been a minute. I'm so happy to see you. How are you?
I'm fine. How about you?
Honestly,
Listen,
it's
I call it existential angst.
yeah, no, it's hard. Like even just like little things like a bunch of businesses I really loved are closing because they just can't afford to exist anymore. So I think it's like, every day is a new thing for your empathy to like try and figure out how to get through because it's sad and it's painful, you
Mhm.
know? Um, Not what we're going to talk about today in full, but I think, there's a burden to existing right now that I think is just sort of real on a daily basis.
I don't know anybody who's handling it. I mean, seriously, nobody. Everybody is upset. Everybody feels like they're off their pins. They're
Yeah,
unbalanced.
yeah,
Um, if they spend any time on it at all, they get really upset.
yeah.
And, so everybody's kind of holding on like this.
Well, I think, part of what was interesting in my research about you, and we'll get into much more minutia, but part of it is I think you, within your realm, pointed out and discussed so many problems that I feel like we're experiencing in a much larger way now in terms of corruption, individual interests, the lack of consideration for the greater good, environmental costs, like all these things that your books talk about in a lot of ways. I feel like those sort of small pieces have just bloomed and bloomed and bloomed into the sort of large problems we're dealing with now. And
I
I'm
think
I'm
people
curious.
recognize them more.
Yes.
That's what I'm seeing is the problems haven't changed. It's just that people's recognition of them have gotten so much more sophisticated.
Talk, what do you mean specifically?
Well, the example that I give is I never used to be able to talk about capitalism in my lectures. It would really upset people. Now
Why?
I don't talk about capitalism. Somebody always says, aren't you talking about capitalism?
What was the rub when you used to bring it up? Why would it be a bother?
That's communistic to talk about capitalism.
Oh, interesting.
You're communist, you're a socialist, you're anti-business, you're off, you're left, you're far left. Only leftists talk about those kinds of things. Now
Oh, that's
everybody
interesting.
recognizes it.
And I think, that's where I look at the sort of catastrophic failures. And a large part of me wonders if this is innate to capitalism, not innate to people, if that makes sense. If it's
Mm,
the structure that's killing us, not our sort of narcissism or personal choices. And that's what I wonder about.
sure.
You were trained in biochemistry and developmental biology when you discovered nutrition. It seems like that immediately took over your life. What drew you to it and what keeps you in it now?
Well, I've told this story a million times. I was teaching cell and molecular biology at Brandeis University, and the department that I was in was the biology department. It had this amazing rule that you could only teach the same class 3 times in a row. They didn't want people to get bored or stale. And the second rule was you had to teach anything that the department needed, whether you knew anything about it or not, on the theory that if you had a doctorate, you could learn things faster than undergraduates. So my 3 semesters of teaching cell and molecular biology were drawing to an end. and the students were asking for human biology classes. I was offered a choice of human physiology or human nutrition. I picked nutrition. I love to eat. Um, and I thought, and I didn't know anything about nutrition, but I was very curious about it because this was this was in the mid 70s, and it was right after Francis Moore Lappé had written Diet for a Small Planet. It was right after Linus Pauling had written Vitamin C in the Common Cold. Take 10 grams a day of vitamin C and you'll never get sick. Um, and it was at a time when a historian named Jeffrey Barraclough, who was at Brandeis, was writing articles for the New York Review of Books on food and power and comparing the food industry to the oil industry. So I used all of that in my first semester teaching. I also used a book from Center for Science in the Public Interest. The advocacy group in Washington, D.C. had just started, and they published a book called Food for People, Not for Profit that could have been written yesterday. I just covered the territory. I used all that in my first class. It was like falling in love. I've never had so much fun teaching, and I never looked back.
I mean, it's a beautiful story though, right? And I think part of what you bring to this is a very different point of view. And I've got to believe some of that comes out of that you actually love it, that it's interesting to you, that it
Oh,
makes you have
oh,
that curiosity.
oh, yeah. I mean, I've never had so much fun studying. Because food is amazing. People have to eat in order to live. Everybody eats, everybody. And you can use food to look at what happens to food in the body, which is the way I started. What's metabolism, what's the biochemistry of dealing with nutrients that are in food, but then where'd the food come from? And why did people make the choices of food that they did? And how come some people make better choices than other people? And you are then in using food as a way to look at major problems in society in a way that everybody can relate to. When I was teaching cell and molecular biology, it was like pulling teeth to get students to understand what was going on because it's so abstract. You can't see it, smell it, taste it, chew it. You have to infer everything that's going on in very complicated and, I mean, they were interesting ways. I liked teaching it, but I love teaching nutrition and food. Big difference
Do you
because
think
it's so much fun.
do you think part of the reason you loved it too was the students' response to what you were
Oh, yeah.
teaching? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I figured out on day one that this was the best way to teach undergraduate biology that I'd ever seen.
Oh,
You could
interesting.
start with a food and say, okay, what's in that food? So you're talking about food composition. And what happens to each of those components in your body? And you're teaching biochemistry
Oh,
in a way that
interesting.
people can understand. You're teaching biochemistry, you're teaching metabolism, you're teaching all this stuff that's really abstract, and everybody gets it.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that, but that is actually very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, you could teach about human physiology because human physiology is all about handling food in the body.
That's
Uh,
okay. So I have four major terms I want to break down in case listeners are not familiar with what these things are. Can you tell me what a food system is?
I can try.
Okay.
It's a way of thinking about the kinds of things I'm talking about, um, in which you consider how the food was produced, harvested, transported, sold, purchased, prepared, and wasted.
What
And
is, oh,
and you can't really talk about any one part of that without understanding the whole thing. That's a system.
what is a processed food?
All foods are processed. All foods are processed. They're washed, they're cut in pieces, they're cooked, they've got salt on them, they're preserved. All of those are processes. And that you don't really care about the processes. Those are still foods. What you care about is what is now called ultra processing, which is a specific classification of processing that industrially transforms a food so that you can no longer recognize what the original basis of it was. And that transformation is designed to make that food irresistibly delicious so that people can't stop eating it. And you do that to sell products for profit.
Last question. You talk about this term of systems over individuals. Can you explain very broadly what that means?
Oh, yeah. I mean, people feel that they are the complete agent of what their food choices are. But food choices depend enormously on how much money you have, what education you have, what your family background is like, what your peers are eating, how much money you have, and what's available to you.
In your work, you
That's a
have,
system.
yes, you've worked for HHS and the government. You've worked at a university. You've written books. You've done all of these things. And I think it's fair to say you've seen the way that large scale industrial capitalist complexes want to make you buy things. You've seen the ways the government does and does not work. You've seen the choices that individuals make. How do you understand the possibility of either education or change, whichever way you want to term it, within these very large umbrellas that the individual exists under? And was your experience with the government that they wanted these changes, or that the lobbyists for big food companies made it more challenging for them to advocate for those needs?
Yeah, let me say in answering that, that the single thing that I really want to get across in my work is that food companies are not social service agencies. They're not public health agencies, they're businesses. And they're businesses with stockholders. And the pleasing stockholders is the number one priority of a business executive these days. And once you understand that, that everything that food companies do makes sense. And if you don't understand that, then you don't understand why the food industry behaves the way it does, why food companies behave the way they do. Their goal is to sell products to as many people as possible at as high a price as they can get away with, because if they don't do that, their stockholders get cross. And if you want to see an example of that, look at what's happened to Kellogg, which, was a iconic American company that split a year or so ago, and now it's two pieces. One has been sold to Mars, and one has been sold to Ferraro, the Italian candy company. And it's the end of Kellogg as we know it, not because um, the only reason for Kellogg to do that was that its stockholders were unhappy that it wasn't making enough money.
And what changes in a company where something like that happens? What does that mean?
Well, I mean, first of all, the companies that bought them will make sure that they cut costs as much as possible, cut the number of employees, get, foreign ingredients if they can do that. They will do everything that they can to make as much money out of the products as they can. And never mind that people are sentimental about these things. There's nothing to do with sentimentality. This is everything to do with profits to stakeholders. And once you understand that and see that repeated over and over and over again, then you understand how the food system works. And you understand what you have to do as an individual. When you go to a store and try to eat healthfully and try to avoid ultra processed foods, you are fighting an entire food system on your own, because that system is set up to sell you as much as you could possibly eat at as high a price as you're willing to pay.
Do you feel that this is morally wrong? Does that matter? And what is the responsibility in a capitalist society to the health of the people who make it so that company can exist? Or is there no responsibility?
There's no responsibility. I mean, this is new in American history. And it started in the early 1980s with a speech by Jack Welch, who was then head of General Electric, who took on the Milton Friedman mantle and said the only responsibility of a corporation is to its stockholders. Never mind blue chip stocks that gave long, slow return on investment. We want higher return on investment now. It's the only thing that matters. Never mind the consequences. The consequences are not our fault. And if we're clever, we can externalize those consequences, which in the case of food involves health, human health, and environmental damage. We can externalize the costs of that, get government to pay for that, get the people to pay for that, and it has nothing to do with us. And that's what's happened.
So you made this very interesting point. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. You said, quote, many workers in the food system depend on federal food assistance programs to survive, meaning that taxpayers are subsidizing Walmart and other such companies. And what I thought was, I had never thought about that before, that the ability to offer those low prices on product are derived from paying people a wage that is not a standard of living, and that the government then has to come in and make it so these people can afford to live so that we can buy cheaper product. That's a really messed up, Ouroboros.
Well, there are
What,
lots of messed up systems in
right,
this, but that's one of them. And so Walmart is famous for squeezing its suppliers
right.
and for squeezing its employees. Amazon does the same thing.
So this leads me to this moment that I at least am having, and a lot of fighting I'm having with my colleagues, where I feel like there has to be sort of an absolute response to no longer purchase and empower these systems that, honestly don't care about the welfare of the people.
Mhm.
And I wonder, why is it so hard to get people to get off of these sort of familiar evils?
Well, I don't think people understand how the system works. So if I were going to do education, the first thing I want people to understand is how the investment system works in the United States. I don't think people know that.
Would
People
you
don't
talk about
know.
it? Will you
I'm
explain?
sorry?
Would you explain some for the listeners?
Well, I mean, we just did that. If people understand that food corporations are about profits to stockholders, and Walmart is a food corporation, okay, it's family owned, but the family works the same way in this particular case, then yeah, those cheap prices seem nice. They seem lovely. But the cost of those cheap prices, because these large corporations have been able to externalize healthcare
Right.
to individuals. We don't have a healthcare system in this country. And they've been able to externalize the costs of bad diets, and they've been able to externalize the environmental costs. Then you don't see it. Once you see this,
Yeah.
then you understand, and then you start buying at farmers markets, or you start buying your food in other ways because you don't want to be part of the system. But it's very difficult for most people not to be part of the system.
And can you talk some about poverty and food insecurity and how those issues play into, unfortunately, reinforcing these problematic systems?
Oh, well, we're not measuring it anymore, so maybe it doesn't exist. Um, the Trump administration has just ended the annual survey of food insecurity in the United States. Food insecurity, by the way, is the Department of Agriculture's term for it's not starvation, it's the inability to have a to be able to rely on a regular source of healthy food on a day-to-day basis. And there are lots and lots of 12 to 15 million people in America who are reported to be food insecure, and the numbers are going up. And this is why the Trump administration doesn't want it measured, because it's embarrassing. I mean, the numbers are now up to where they were in 2008,
Really?
during that reception. That's now back to that. And they had been going down quite steadily, and they continued to go down. The percentage continued to fall during the pandemic because of the government subsidies that came in and prevented a great deal of food insecurity. But Congress ended those subsidies. And as soon as they did, then people didn't have any money and couldn't buy food. And if you can't buy food, and have only a limited amount of money, you want to get the most calories you possibly can for the amount that you're spending. And so you're buying the cheapest foods available, and those are the ultra processed ones that are not very good for you. And this is the first time in history that poor people have been fatter than rich people. And there's a
Interesting.
reason for that. And that is that poor people rely on sources of cheap calories. And one of the things that ultra processed foods do is they encourage people to eat more.
Right.
You can't stop eating them. You get used to the taste. You love the combination of salt, sugar, and fat. You can't stop eating them. And there's research that shows that. And there's also research that shows that they're closely associated with poor health outcome.
And when you talk about this, it sounds like there's an addictive quality to it. How does that
I'll
work?
say yes. Yeah.
Can you talk about the possible sort of science of that? How does it work within your body? What does it comfort or regulate? What does the salt and the sugar and the fat do? Can you get a little more
I'm not
scientific
sure I
about that?
know. The idea was that these foods induce dopamine in the same way that addictive drugs do, but that's been tested and that didn't show.
Okay.
What they are is they're hyper palatable. They're just delicious. People just love them. And the Oreo cookies, I mean, I could sit in front of a bag of Oreo cookies and those cookies would disappear and I would never notice it. Um, and that's part of it. It's that combination of texture and flavor. People just love to eat them and can't stop. And why that is being investigated or was being
Right.
investigated. That investigator has left NIH, so I don't know what'll happen now. But it looks like it's what they call hyperpalatability, deliciousness. People just love them. Calorie density, which means in a very small amount of food, you get lots of calories, and people like that. We're hardwired to like getting calories. And then I think a third one is that these foods have been essentially pre-digested. So
Okay.
because of the processing,
Right.
so they go down really quickly and they're absorbed very quickly and they work like sugary beverages.
Right. Was there ever a time or a society where the people who ran the society felt a responsibility to keep their constituents healthy, or has that never existed?
Well, we had that between 1950 and 1980 in the United States.
What
You
was
know,
the
that was
procedure?
Well, it was during a period when um, the policies, federal policies, were set up to promote a middle class. It was when the size of the middle class in the United States grew, the discrepancy between the wages of the very richest and the very poorest was narrowest. And in 1980, all that changed. So, the investment system from 1950 to 1980 valued corporations doing things for the communities in which they were located. They took care of their workers.
Right.
They took care of their workers' healthcare. They took care of their workers' long time employment. They took care of their retirement. They took care of their families. They sponsored baseball games. They did all kinds of things that, and they weren't demanding. They were profitable, but they weren't demanding as high a level of profit as is demanded now. And that changed in 1980.
Did you
That's
know
the
that was a decisive moment, or did it seem like, let's see what happens?
Well, no, I mean, I certainly didn't.
Okay.
President Reagan was elected in 1980, and then in 1981, Jack Welch made this speech. And I think it was only in retrospect that people realized that all of a sudden, the prevalence of obesity in the United States started to rise very rapidly. Up until then, it had kind of ticked along at about 10 to 15% of the population. And all of a sudden, 40% of the population was obese.
Within years?
within that 20-year period.
Okay, okay.
From 1980 to 2000
2000.
from 1980 to 2000, there was just this sharp rise. And I've been very interested in that rise. Genetics didn't change. Really, personal responsibility didn't change. What changed was the food environment, which went from one in which people ate 3 meals a day and didn't snack, and parents wouldn't let their kids eat between meals, to one in which everybody was eating all the time. And that was I think the overriding cause of it was the number of food production increased enormously, so that the number of calories in the food supply went from 3,200 per capita. That means men, women, little tiny babies, to 4,000 during that 20-year period. And there's tons of evidence that people started eating more. For one thing, portion sizes got larger. And I had a doctoral student, Lisa Young, who, as her doctoral dissertation, did a historical study on the introduction of large portions into the food supply. And between 1980 and 2000, the size of portions of foods available doubled, tripled, quadrupled. I mean, I remember when giant muffins and giant bagels came in. And if you want to know what they used to look like, mini muffins and mini bagels.
Yeah.
That's what they used to be. And if I had one concept to get across, larger portions have more calories.
Of course. No, and I think when you look at that, because I think what's interesting too about your research is you are sort of loath to blame the individual. You accord a lot of responsibility to the larger superstructures that people live under, which I
I
think
don't
is
think individuals have a chance in
yes,
this
but I think
environment. They
that's
don't have a chance. You're fighting an entire food system on your own, and you can't do that. They're bigger than you
right.
are.
But that's what I really like about a lot of your work, right? You're not saying, oh, you're fat or you're poor or you did this or you did that. It's you're operating under a superstructure that's impossible. And I wonder, why is there not more regulation, more education, and more understanding, even just on the one-to-one personal understanding that people can give to each other? Like I grew up in the Bay Area, so we grew up with a lot more awareness of this issue, but it seems kind of criminal to poison your population the way that they're being poisoned now. I mean, what do you think?
I think the society is set up to consume.
Yeah,
No, I mean, the entire society is set up to get people to spend money and buy things.
right.
The objective of the food system is to get you to eat as much as you possibly can and to buy as much food as you possibly can at as higher price to get you to eat frequently, everywhere, and in large portions. And they did that. Food companies did that between 1980 and 2000. I can remember when, I mean, I've got funny examples of this. I can remember when you weren't allowed to bring any food into a bookstore.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I can remember that. When I first came to NYU in 1988, there were fabulous signs all over the library. They were very funny. They were very well designed. Signs saying, don't bring food in here because cockroaches will get at them and it'll spoil the books. And now there's cafes, and the floor of the NYU library is basically a lounge in which kids are
Eating.
eating and drinking, and they're on their computers. No, libraries don't have books anymore. They just have computers. So that changed. And the large portion thing, I mean, the number of calories in bagels and muffins tripled,
Right.
and nobody realized it. And everybody likes a lot of food. And you think if you're eating one, it's got 100 calories and you don't have to worry about it. I mean, it's not intuitively obvious that larger portions have more calories. We did that experiment. I mean, Lisa Young did that in her class. Oh, when I was writing the calorie book, I said, ask your class how many calories are in an 8-ounce soda and how many calories are in a 64-ounce big gulp. And, I mean, NYU students, I expected them not necessarily to know how many calories were in an 8-ounce soda, but I certainly expected them to multiply by eight. Eight eights are 64, right? The average multiplier was three.
Huh.
So I said to Lisa, go back and find out. They can't be that mathematically challenged.
Right.
And what they told her was it is impossible for a soda to have 800 calories.
Oh,
It's impossible. They just didn't believe it. But
interesting.
a 64-ounce soda does have 800 calories. It really does.
Right.
And so that's what you're up against.
What do you feel when you figure out all these things? Like, do you feel hope because you've got the information and you can communicate, or do you feel profound sadness that this is how the system is working? Like, what do you, as you uncover more and more in your
That
research, what do you think?
feel all of that. I mean, I want people to understand this and understand that if they are, if somebody is yelling at them because if they've got a doctor who's yelling at them because they're not eating healthfully, that eating healthfully is very difficult in this society. It's really hard. And, for somebody like me who doesn't, I'm old, I don't eat much anymore, and it's easy. I don't buy a lot of junk food. I like it.
Of course.
I just don't eat very much of it. I think maybe when you get old, you have automatic GLP-1. I don't know. I don't get it. But I'm just not that hungry anymore. But certainly when I was young, I ate a lot of food and a lot more than I eat now. And I liked it. I like eating. It's fun.
And that's what I think is part of the problem is that food is a comfort, is a joy, is an anxiety, is a sadness. How do people parse out? I know it's called emotional eating sometimes now, but what food does to make you feel better with some of the other things that are going on when you consume, especially in a capitalist society?
Mm. Well, it's very interesting. It's one of the things that the anti-obesity drugs do. Is they stop the pleasure that people get. Well, for some people, for some, not everybody. Some people still retain it, but they certainly stop what's called food noise, which is the idea that you got to eat if there's something around that you
Mm.
like. You got to eat it. Um, that seems to stop. And, I mean, we've learned a lot about people's relationship with food from these drugs, from experience with these drugs,
Oh,
the
interesting.
that I find very interesting. But, I mean, yeah, you should. I mean, fortunately, I like vegetables. It makes things much easier.
Yeah.
If you can train yourself to like vegetables, you're way ahead of the game.
And okay, so your book Food Politics, pardon me, Food Politics came out in 2002. At this point you were almost 66.
Hmm.
I feel like that book was a big turning point for your place in the world with the work you were doing. Does that seem fair?
Oh yeah, I wrote about that in my memoir.
Right. So what happened with that book and how did it change how people listened to you?
Well, I the the first question was, what does food have to do with politics? I thought that what I did in that book was to describe the obvious. It's a descriptive book of how the subtitle is How the Food Industry Influences Nutrition and Health. And I have several examples that I discuss at considerable length of how the food industry influenced the way in which the food system is set up in order to get people to eat more. I mean, that's what the book was about. And what surprised me was how shocked people were.
Yes.
It was considered groundbreaking. It's come out in two subsequent editions, by the way, in 2007 and 2013. There were updated editions, and I'm very preliminary discussions with the publisher about a 25th anniversary edition. But um, people had never thought about it before. Everybody thought about food companies as a company that makes products that they just love to eat.
Really?
Well, sure. You go into the
Interesting.
supermarket and there are all these yummy things. If you don't think about how they got there,
Right.
or why they're there, or why they're positioned on a shelf in the way they're positioned, or why some things are on one shelf and one are on another, and some are at the end of the aisles, and why the chewing gum is always next to the cash register. People don't think about those things. It looks random. It is not
Interesting.
random.
No, no.
It is not random. So, once you understand that the entire system is set up to get you to buy products, this is about turning you into a serious consumer. Once you understand that, then you begin to see things in a different way. And, I had a moment in which I realized that, and that occurred in the early 1990s, and it took me 10 years to write the book. But that's what the book is about. The book is about food politics is about looking at the way in which food companies market to individuals and in ways that you're not, if the marketing is done well, you don't notice.
If I can ask, what was the moment where you figured it out in the 90s? What happened that it
Oh,
clicked
I've
in?
told that story a million times too. I was at a meeting at the National Cancer Institute in Washington, D.C., and it was a meeting on behavioral causes of cancer, and most of the people there were anti-smoking advocates. They were physicians and scientists international, who were on major anti-smoking campaigns in their home countries. And they gave talks. It was before PowerPoint. So they showed slide after slide after slide of cigarette marketing. And I think there was one talk from a researcher at the University of California, San Diego, who's still there, actually. And he did a slide talk on cigarette marketing to children. And he showed, it was during the Joe Camel era, and he showed slide after slide after slide of Joe Camel all over the world, in Nepal, in the jungles of Africa. I mean, in places where you couldn't believe that these companies could get into, and there were pictures of Joe Camel, a cartoon character clearly aimed at teenage boys. And I was stunned. I was
Right,
absolutely stunned. I knew that cigarette companies marketed to kids. It wasn't that I didn't know that.
right.
I had just never noticed it. I never paid
Interesting.
any attention to it. And I walked out of those slideshows thinking, ooh, we should be doing this for Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
So I started doing that. I started noticing. That was the difference. I started noticing. I had a camera. I started taking pictures of soda marketing, of McDonald's marketing, of food marketing, everywhere I went, and put together my own slideshow. I mean, this is plagiarism. And I put together my own slideshow. I started writing articles for journals about marketing to kids. And I had one big impetus. I was going to a lot of meetings, professional meetings on childhood obesity.
Mm,
And I was hearing speaker after speaker after speaker bemoan, what are we going to do to get moms to feed their kids better? And I thought, I'm not hearing a single speaker say,
right.
what are we going to do to get the food industry to stop marketing
Yeah.
their junk food to my kid? And I thought the priorities here are completely wrong.
Right.
The priority is not moms. Moms are facing a food industry that's trying to get their kid to want these products from a very early age. The industry even has a name for it, the pester factor. You want to up the pester factor so that the kids will beg their parents and have tantrums in the supermarket if their parents don't buy them
The
the
thing.
food with the cartoon on it. And I've had parents who say, we've never taken our kid to McDonald's. We don't watch television. We don't do anything. And when we drive by a McDonald's, our kid says, take me there.
Right.
They have no idea how it happens
Because it's ubiquitous.
because it's ubiquitous,
Yeah.
totally.
Yeah.
And its purpose is to sell food.
So, what I wonder then is, since the only power is going to come from people, what can people do? And what can they do additionally in a world right now where everything scientific is being questioned? Some with reason, but some radically without.
Um, I don't know. I think it's really tough for individuals.
Hmm.
I get asked all the time, who can I trust? I say, me, of course. You know, might as well have some fun with this.
Yeah.
I don't know how to answer that question. I think if it makes sense, it's probably okay. If it doesn't make sense, or if it seems like I particularly like everything you ever knew about nutrition is wrong, ooh, that's a red flag going up in the air. Then you get your skeptical hat on because no, everything you've ever learned about nutrition is not wrong. Um, and I don't know, people have to do the best they can. And I'm constantly quoting Michael Pollan. I think that nutrition advice is so simple that he can do it in 7 words. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. That's really all there is to it. As soon as you define food as not ultra processed, anything that's not ultra processed is
Gets
food.
us at least a step away
Yeah. I mean,
from the problem.
anything that's not ultra processed is a food. So you eat food and you don't eat too much of it. And you make sure you got some plants in there. You're doing fine.
And so, how do you, since we live in this time of tremendous distrust, period, and a lot of your work is focused on misleading at best, lying at worst. How do people parse out in terms of food and food education beyond what you're saying? Like when they look at ingredients, when they go and read what's on the box, is there any simple way to really say, like, if you know what it is, maybe think about it. And if you don't know what it is, maybe move on?
Well, I used to say anything with more than five
Right.
ingredients. I mean, it helps if you know what the ingredients are, but if it's got a great big long list of ingredients and you don't recognize them as a food, then it's ultra processed.
Right.
That's why the ultra processed concept is so useful, because once you can identify what an ultra processed food is, you can avoid it
Right.
if you're reading labels. It helps to read labels. I,
Yes.
I advise reading labels. They're really fun.
You also said that your wish list, sort of for the world, includes universal healthcare, school meals, and a basic income. What are the obstacles to this in the richest country in the world, and how can we normal citizens make that more of a possible reality?
The obstacles are pretty obvious. Have you seen what's going on in Congress lately?
I know.
Um, they're pretty obvious. The anything that goes up against profits for corporations is going to encounter problems
Yeah.
because the purpose of a corporation is to be profitable. I'll say that again and again and again. So you want to do advocacy to fight that? Join organizations. Find out organizations in your area that are working on issues that you care about and join them. Work locally because you can make a big difference in
Yeah.
people's health and in the environment, but with local rules, either in local communities or at the state level. You want power, run for office.
And with that in mind, have you ever gotten pushback or threats because of your work, or have you been able to do your work without sort of fear?
You know, I've never been bothered very much. Um,
Interesting.
I've had trolling. I write a daily blog at foodpolitics.com.
Right.
And I used to take comments on it, but I had to stop them because the trolling was so nasty and people didn't like it. And I certainly didn't like it. Um, but threats, no. As I explained, I had tenure. It was a
What a
very,
luxury.
it was a very wonderful thing, let me tell you. I had tenure at a university that thought what I was doing was just fine.
Lucky you. That's
So
awesome.
when the trolls tried to organize a campaign to get me fired, and I took it to the dean and discussed it with him, he just burst out laughing.
How long ago did that happen?
Probably 10 years ago.
Oh, recently. I
Yeah.
mean, in your career.
Oh, yeah, it was 10 years ago. There was a really bad troll. Um, and he was organizing, he was writing letters to the university to get me fired. Um, and oh, I remember talking to the dean. The dean thought it was hilarious.
Lucky you. That's wonderful,
Yeah.
because
So I
I'm
always, I always had support.
and the big corporations have never tried to woo you in any way.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I have entertained in my office at NYU the heads of many large food corporations, many.
Without saying names, can I just ask, how does that go? What do you do? How do you manage that sort of need from them?
I talk to them. Of course, I
Okay.
talk to them. They want to tell me all the wonderful things they're doing.
Hmm.
They want me to understand that. And I listen to them. You know,
Yeah.
I've talked to a lot of food industry executives. Many of them really mean well,
Okay.
but they're caught up in stockholder requirements and their hands are tied.
Yeah.
And so, I repeat this over and over and over again. These companies have their hands are tied. If what they're doing is not maximizing profit, they get into trouble with their stockholders. And that
Yeah.
has major consequences. Their stock prices go down, the CEO gets fired. They don't like that.
Right. There's got to be another way to solve that problem, though.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're going to change the way the food system works. You have to overturn Citizens United and get money out of politics.
Right.
You have to change the investment system so that corporations are required to take community and worker values into consideration
Yes.
into their daily activities. Some percentage of what they're making has to go to
Right.
support the communities that they're in and the workers who are working for them. Um, and then universal basic income and
Yes.
universal school meals.
Yeah.
Well, those things would help.
I agree. No, I agree with you. And I think that it's always shocking to me that those issues are so far down the ladder because that's really the greatest greater good that we can hope for.
Yeah, but we don't have a government that's interested in the greatest good right now because it's sold out to corporations. We have a captured government.
Did we ever have a government that was deeply invested in that after the 80s?
Well, after the 80s, no.
Yes, I agree. I don't think we
No,
have
but
since
between
then.
1950 and 1980, there was hope. Things were still difficult then.
Yeah.
But there was, I mean, I grew up in that era, and I thought we were changing the world for the
I know.
better.
I know. And I
And,
think that's
you
a
know,
tough reality where we are now.
yeah, and we could see the change. There was the civil rights movement and the women's movement and the anti-smoking movement and all of those things. There was real progress being made, but what we didn't understand was the level of pushback.
No, I don't. I think
Mm.
anyone that was on that side, it was hard to anticipate how much
How
anger there would
strong,
be.
how strong the pushback would be. Um, and that's what we're in now. So,
When part of what we're in now is that, 1 million workers, primarily farm workers, have left the United States. How is that going to impact, or is it going to impact the issues that you're talking about?
well, we'll import more food and it will be more expensive.
Yes.
We're going to see. I mean, one of the things about, I have a book coming out in November, What to Eat Now. That's a new edition of a book I published almost 20 years ago. And one of the things that's obvious from the new edition is how much food prices have gone up. They've doubled in the last 20 years, but they've also doubled in the last 5 years.
Really?
Going to a grocery store now is a shocking experience, even for somebody with an adequate income, which I have. I'm just shocked. I bought a box of cereal the other day for 7.50. Are you kidding me? 10
Is
cents worth of ingredients?
is there any possible justification or no?
Well, there's some justification. The price of everything has gone up. But if we don't have anybody to pick vegetables, they're going to be really expensive,
Yeah.
or they're going to be outsourced to other countries where the safety standards are not as good as they are here. But there's no question that food prices will go up further.
Yes. And yes, there's just a lot of things going on right now that I think are going to unfortunately negatively impact a lot of the things that you've been trying to bring people's attention to for the last, 50 years. And with that in mind, within the last 10 years, what do you think is the greatest success within your field? What do you think is the most troubling failure?
I think the biggest success, and I'll give Robert F. Kennedy Jr. some credit for this, is public awareness of these issues.
Okay.
There's, we talked about this earlier, that I think public awareness of food issues has increased dramatically within the last few years. The pandemic had a lot to do with it. People could see what the supply chain issues were, and certainly RFK Jr. has brought these issues to public attention in a way that I've never seen before. What he's doing with it is another matter, but certainly the public attention part of it has been, I think, huge. Um, the failure is that we have income inequality. And until the income inequality issue is addressed, we're going to have large numbers of people who can't eat healthfully.
And just to clarify for listeners, I imagine you don't support, you've been very clear about not supporting a lot of what RFK is talking about, but except for this one part of what you're mentioning.
They've had two wins on food.
Yeah.
I think they've done a really great job of getting companies to agree to get the artificial colors out of foods.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm for that
Yeah.
100%. I just don't think it's the most important issue.
No.
Um, and closing the generally recognized as safe loophole is also, I think, a clear win. But they're not doing anything about ultra processed foods, marketing to children, um, getting the chemicals out of soil and water.
Can you talk about vaccines a little? Can we digress to that if that's
Like
okay?
one
And
of the
then
great public health achievements of the 20th century. I mean, I'm old enough so that I remember what it was like before there was a vaccine for measles, mumps, and whooping cough. I had I had mumps and whooping cough. I was out of school at the age of 10, I was out of school for 2 months with whooping cough and mumps. Um, and kids were really sick. Measles is not fun. Kids were really sick. And the idea that you would do anything to go back on that.
yeah,
And I feel the same way about fluoridation. There's very, very little evidence that fluoridation, when done properly, does any harm whatsoever. And there's an enormous amount of evidence that it does good
right,
in stopping
right.
tooth decay. So we're going to have kids with bad teeth again, rotted out teeth. Really?
No, I think this is where the danger and distrust comes from, right? Like it's fine to distrust as long as you understand what it is that you're distrusting and you're doing your research, but just to sort of blanket statement say something isn't valid because you have a feeling, and that's sort of the era we're in now. It's so dangerous, especially with all the strides that we've made, especially for the most vulnerable.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I often get asked, why should I believe you?
What do you say?
I don't know how to answer that question. All I can say is, I've had a long career. I've had a 50-year career, and the I've read a lot. I've looked at a lot of research. I've seen a lot. I give my opinion. You can listen to it or not. It's up to you. You
But what's
can't.
important too is you're not profiteering off of it in the same way that all these other superstructures are. Like, yes, you have a job, but you're not
I
making
don't
billions
have
of
a job.
dollars.
I'm retired. I'm living on retirement.
You had a job for a very
I
long
had,
time and you
I
have
had.
your books, which I imagine pay something, but you're not,
Are you
you,
kidding? You don't make any money off of books.
even at the 25th year edition.
Oh, no.
Oh
No. I
man.
mean, you have to be a best-selling author to make money off of books. It's a few $1,000s a year. You can't live on it.
But what I think is important, right, is you are not making a ridiculous income off of what you're doing. And I
No.
think in this era, that matters. It matters that um, in a certain way it's not largely profitable because I think then there's more of an inclination to tell the truth.
Yeah, I mean, I call it the way I see it,
Right.
and I'm not beholden to anybody. I've never had to have grants. I've never had to take money from a food corporation. I've never needed outside money to do the work that I do, which gives me the independence to say what I think.
Yeah, and be honest and also do the
I try.
research.
I try.
No, and I love that about your work. I mean, your work has been very important for a very long time, and it's honestly a small group of you guys at the end of the day who are doing this work. It's not some giant cabal. It's a few people who are, I think, being listened to, but shouting out into the wilderness and hoping it's
I
heard.
mean, I write this blog on foodpolitics.com. It doesn't have a huge number of followers.
But the people who do are very wild about you for whatever that's worth.
Oh, that I have no knowledge of.
Oh no, my friend a million years ago, I said, who's really interesting? And she thought you were the greatest thing since the two slice toaster. And that's when I started to really research you because she was so fervent
Mm.
about how important your work was and the way in which you did it. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. You
Oh,
know,
that nice. Thank you.
you do. You have a lot of fans out there. Do you have any questions or any extra thoughts for me?
Only that you were absolutely right. I enjoyed it a lot.
I'm so glad. That makes my day. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh. Anyway, and send me a link when you've got
Of course.
whatever you do with this gets done.
Of course. Of course. I will. And I hope you enjoy it. And the art will be beautiful. So I'm excited about that.
Art?
Yes, there's a hero image that this artist I work with does for each episode. And so it's
Oh,
like a very beautiful, I think, rendering of you, but it's not a photo, it's a drawn image.
ooh, I can't wait to see it.
Me neither. I'm very excited. All
Great.
right. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
bye.
Have a wonderful day. Thank you.